I stared at the beautiful wooden box sitting on my doorstep, wrapped in elegant silver paper with my name written in my mother's careful handwriting. It was my 32nd birthday, and this unexpected package from my parents, Tom and Linda, caught me completely off guard. Inside, I discovered the most exquisite handmade chocolates I had ever seen, each piece carefully crafted with intricate swirl designs and delicate sugar flowers. My heart warmed at this rare gesture of affection from my usually distant family. The next morning, my parents and sister Sarah called me together on a three-way call, asking eagerly about the chocolates. I smiled broadly and said with genuine happiness, "Oh, I gave them to my younger brother David and Sarah's twin boys, Jake and Mason. You know how much kids love sweets, and I wanted to share the joy." The line went completely silent before all three voices erupted in absolute panic. "What did you do?" Sarah's voice cracked through the phone speaker with pure terror. My stomach dropped as I heard my mother sobbing hysterically in the background while my father shouted something unintelligible about hospitals and poison control. "Wait, what's wrong?" I demanded, my hands beginning to shake as an icy fear crept through my chest. "They're just chocolates, right? Jerry, you need to get to our house right now," Tom commanded with a trembling voice that I had never heard before. "Don't ask questions, just come immediately." I threw on clothes and raced through the Denver suburbs to my parents' modest ranch house on Maple Street, my mind spinning with horrible possibilities. What could be so dangerous about homemade chocolates? When I burst through their front door, I stopped dead in my tracks. The entire extended family was gathered in the living room, and every single face was pale with guilt and terror. Aunt Margaret sat hunched over in the corner recliner, wringing her hands and avoiding my eyes. Uncle Robert paced frantically near the fireplace, his usually confident demeanor completely shattered. Cousin Patricia kept checking her phone with nervous glances toward the door, as if expecting the worst possible news at any moment. "Where are David and the boys?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah collapsed onto the floral couch, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They're at Denver General Hospital," she choked out. "Jerry, those chocolates weren't just regular chocolates." My legs nearly gave out beneath me. "What do you mean they weren't regular chocolates?" Linda stepped forward, her face ashen and aged 10 years since yesterday. "We ground up prescription sleep medication and mixed it into the chocolate filling," she admitted in a broken voice. "They were meant for you, Jerry. Only you." The room started spinning as the implications crashed over me like a tidal wave. "You drugged the chocolates? Why would you do something like that?" Tom cleared his throat, unable to meet my eyes. "There's an emergency board meeting for Grandpa Walter's construction company today at 3 o'clock. If you miss it, your inheritance rights automatically transfer to the rest of the family according to the bylaws." I stared at my father in complete disbelief. "You were going to drug me unconscious to steal my inheritance." "It wasn't stealing," Sarah protested weakly. "We just thought it would be easier if you weren't there to complicate things. The business is too much responsibility for one person anyway." "How much medication did you put in those chocolates?" I demanded, my voice rising with each word. Uncle Robert stepped forward with a guilty expression. "About 6 doses of prescription sleeping pills per piece. We calculated it based on your weight to keep you unconscious for 12 hours. My blood turned to ice. David weighs 60 pounds less than me, and Jake and Mason are 8 years old. How could you calculate dosages for children?" The horrible silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't calculated anything for children because they never expected children to eat the chocolates. They had prepared enough sedatives to knock out a grown man, and now my innocent younger brother and 2 little boys were fighting for their lives because of my family's greed. Sarah's husband, Mark, a lawyer with slicked back hair and expensive suits, emerged from the kitchen holding a manila folder. "Jerry, we need to discuss your legal options here. The family is willing to help you through this difficult situation, but we need your cooperation." "What kind of cooperation?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Mark opened the folder and spread documents across the coffee table. "We've prepared a statement explaining that you're mentally unfit to handle the responsibilities of the family business. There are also affidavits from several family members documenting concerning behavior patterns over the past year." I picked up one of the papers and scanned the fabricated claims. According to these documents, I had exhibited signs of paranoia, financial irresponsibility, and emotional instability. Every family gathering, every casual conversation, every moment of vulnerability had been twisted into evidence against my mental competence. "This is all fake," I said, my voice hollow with shock. "The important thing is helping those children recover." Aunt Margaret finally spoke from her corner chair. "Jerry, if you care about David and the boys, you'll sign these papers and let the family handle the business matters. We don't want to involve the authorities in what was clearly an accident." I looked around the room at these people who shared my blood, who I had trusted and loved my entire life, and realized I was staring at strangers. Worse than strangers. I was looking at people who had calculated how to drug me into unconsciousness, steal my inheritance, and now wanted me to take responsibility for nearly killing 3 innocent family members. "I need to see David and the boys," I said firmly. "That's not a good idea right now," Tom replied quickly. "The doctors said they need rest, and seeing you might upset them. Why don't you sign these papers first, and then we can discuss visitation?" But I was already heading for the door, my mind reeling with the realization that my own family had tried to drug me and were now attempting to manipulate me into giving up everything my grandfather had worked to build. As I reached for the doorknob, Sarah's voice stopped me cold. "Jerry, if you don't cooperate with us, we'll have to tell the authorities that you deliberately gave dangerous chocolates to children. Who do you think they'll believe? A stable family with legal documentation of your mental problems? Or a man with a history of erratic behavior?" I drove to Denver General Hospital with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The sterile smell of disinfectant hit me as I approached the pediatric ward, where a tired-looking nurse directed me to room 212. Through the window, I saw David lying motionless in a hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped steadily in the quiet room. Jake and Mason were in the adjoining room, their small forms dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding them. The sight of their unconscious bodies filled me with a rage so pure and powerful that I had to lean against the wall to steady myself. "Are you Jerry?" asked a woman's voice behind me. I turned to see Dr. Elizabeth Carter, a middle-aged physician with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore scrubs decorated with cartoon animals, clearly designed to put young patients at ease. "I'm David's brother and the boy's uncle," I explained. "How are they doing?" Dr. Carter consulted her clipboard with a grave expression. "They're stable now, but it was touch and go for several hours. The medication level in their blood was extremely dangerous, especially considering their body weights. David consumed approximately 2 pieces of the chocolate, while each boy ate 1 piece. Their faster metabolisms actually helped process the drugs more quickly than an adult would. Will they recover completely?" "We believe so, but they'll need monitoring for at least 48 hours. Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you some difficult questions about how these children ingested prescription medication." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Family meeting at 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. We need to resolve this situation before it gets out of hand." Dr. Carter noticed my distraction. "Is everything all right?" "Doctor, I need to tell you something important about those chocolates." I explained the entire situation to Dr. Carter, watching her expression shift from professional concern to outright alarm as I described my family's inheritance scheme and their admission of deliberately drugging the chocolates. "Mr. Morrison, this is attempted murder," she said quietly. "The dosage levels we found in these children's blood could easily have been fatal for adults, let alone children." "What do you mean fatal?" Dr. Carter led me to a private consultation room and closed the door. "The concentration of sedatives in those chocolates was enough to cause respiratory failure in a full-grown adult. Your brother and nephews survived because they consumed smaller amounts and their young bodies processed the drugs differently. But if you had eaten those chocolates as intended..." The room started spinning again as the full impact hit me. My family hadn't planned to drug me unconscious for a business meeting. They had planned to kill me. "Doctor, I need to show you something," I said, pulling out my phone. I scrolled through months of text messages from Sarah, documenting times when I had felt mysteriously ill after family dinners, holiday gatherings, and casual visits to my parents' house. Dr. Carter read through the messages with growing concern. "Mr. Morrison, these symptoms you described suggest you may have been ingesting small amounts of various medications for months. Have you been getting blood work done regularly? No, but I can get some done right now. 2 hours later, Dr. Carter called me back with results that confirmed my worst fears. My blood showed traces of at least 4 different prescription medications, including anti-anxiety drugs, blood pressure medication, and sleep aids. Your family has been slowly poisoning you for months, Dr. Carter stated bluntly. This wasn't their first attempt. They were building up to something bigger. She connected me with Detective James Morrison, a seasoned investigator with the Denver Police Department who specialized in financial crimes and family violence. Detective Morrison was a tall man with silver hair and the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much human cruelty. Jerry, your case fits a pattern we've been investigating, Detective Morrison explained as we sat in the hospital cafeteria. There have been 3 similar inheritance murders in Colorado over the past 5 years. In each case, family members slowly poisoned the heir over time, then escalated to a lethal dose when they needed to finalize the inheritance transfer. You think my family has done this before? I think your family has been planning this for a very long time. Detective Morrison pulled out a thick file folder. We've actually been investigating your family for suspected elder abuse of your grandfather before his death. There were several concerning reports from his neighbors about family members visiting frequently toward the end of his life, and his doctor noted some unusual symptoms that didn't match his documented health conditions. My grandfather, Walter, had died 18 months ago from what the family claimed was a sudden heart attack. He had been healthy and active at 78, still running his construction company and taking daily walks around the neighborhood. His death had been unexpected but not questioned by authorities at the time. Jerry, I need you to think carefully. Did your grandfather show any signs of confusion or unusual behavior in the weeks before he died? I remembered visiting Walter 2 weeks before his death. He had seemed tired and disoriented, complaining about feeling dizzy and having trouble remembering conversations. The family had attributed these symptoms to normal aging, but now I wondered if they had been deliberately caused. There's something else. Detective Morrison continued. Your grandfather's lawyer, Frank Hutchinson, has been trying to reach you for months. Your family told him you were traveling overseas and couldn't be contacted. Frank Hutchinson was a respected estate attorney who had handled Walter's legal affairs for over 20 years. If he had been trying to reach me, it meant there was something important about the inheritance that my family didn't want me to know. Mr. Hutchinson left specific instructions that you were to receive a sealed letter immediately upon your grandfather's death, Detective Morrison explained. Your family claimed they would deliver it to you, but apparently, that never happened. We drove directly to Frank Hutchinson's office in downtown Denver. Frank was a distinguished gentleman in his 60s with a white beard and the careful manner of someone who had spent decades handling delicate legal matters. His office walls were lined with law books and family photos that spoke of a lifetime dedicated to protecting people's final wishes. Jerry, I've been worried about you, Frank said as he unlocked a secure filing cabinet. Your grandfather left very specific instructions about his concerns regarding your family's intentions. Frank handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Walter's familiar handwriting. Inside was a 2-page letter that made my blood run cold. My dear grandson Jerry, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and my fears about our family have likely proven justified. I have reason to believe that Tom, Linda, and Sarah are planning to harm me and eventually harm you to gain control of the construction company and our family assets. Over the past 6 months, I have been experiencing symptoms that I believe are the result of deliberate poisoning. I have documented these incidents and left evidence in safety deposit box number 437 at First National Bank. The key is hidden behind the loose brick in my workshop fireplace. Jerry, trust no one in our family except yourself. They have been planning this for years, and they will not stop until they have everything. I love you, and am sorry to burden you with this knowledge, but you are the only one I can trust to seek justice. Your loving grandfather, Walter. Frank watched my face as I read the letter. Jerry, your grandfather also left instructions that if anything happened to you or if you were declared mentally incompetent, I was to immediately contact federal authorities. He suspected your family's activities extended beyond just local inheritance fraud. What do you mean, federal authorities? Your grandfather discovered that Tom and Sarah have been running similar schemes in Arizona and Nevada. They've been targeting elderly relatives across multiple states, using the same gradual poisoning methods and legal manipulation tactics. I felt the room spinning as the full scope of my family's criminal enterprise became clear. They weren't just greedy relatives trying to steal an inheritance. They were professional predators who had turned murder into a family business. "There's one more thing," Frank said softly. "Your grandfather suspected that your ex-fiancée Amanda was paid to break your engagement and gather information about your personal life. He hired a private investigator who documented several meetings between Amanda and your sister Sarah. Amanda and I had been together for 3 years and engaged for 6 months when she suddenly ended our relationship 2 years ago. She had claimed I was developing a gambling addiction and becoming financially irresponsible, accusations that devastated me because I had never gambled and had always been careful with money. Now I realized those accusations had been planted by my family to isolate me and damage my credibility. As I sat in Frank Hutchinson's office, surrounded by evidence of my family's betrayal, I realized that every major disappointment and failure in my adult life had been orchestrated by the people who were supposed to love and support me. They had systematically destroyed my relationships, my reputation, and my sense of reality, all while planning to murder me for money. But now I knew the truth, and I had allies who believed me. For the first time since receiving that phone call about the chocolates, I felt something other than fear and betrayal. I felt the beginning of determination to fight back. The next morning, I returned to the hospital to check on David and the boys. But Dr. Carter pulled me aside with an expression more grave than I had seen before. "Jerry, I need to share some additional test results with you," she said, leading me to her private office. I ran more comprehensive toxicology screens on all 3 patients, and what I found is deeply concerning. Dr. Carter spread several lab reports across her desk, pointing to highlighted numbers that meant nothing to me but clearly alarmed her. The concentration of sedatives in those chocolates was not just dangerous, Jerry, it was lethal. We're talking about enough medication to cause complete respiratory failure in a healthy adult male. I stared at the reports, trying to process what she was telling me. "But you said David survived because he only ate 2 pieces. That's exactly my point. David consumed approximately 1/3 of a lethal dose. The twins each consumed about 1/6. If you had eaten those chocolates as your family intended, consuming 4 or 5 pieces as a normal person would, you would have died within hours." The weight of this revelation hit me like a physical blow. They weren't trying to drug me unconscious. They were trying to kill me. I'm afraid that's the only logical conclusion based on these dosage levels. Dr. Carter continued explaining the medical evidence, but my mind was reeling with the implications. My family had planned my murder with the same careful attention they might give to planning a birthday party. They had calculated dosages, prepared alibis, and arranged legal documents, all while maintaining the facade of loving relatives. "There's something else you need to know," Dr. Carter said softly. "I've been reviewing your medical history, and I found records of several emergency room visits over the past 18 months, where you came in with symptoms consistent with medication poisoning." She pulled up my medical records on her computer screen. "November of last year, you were treated for severe nausea and disorientation after Thanksgiving dinner. February, you came in with respiratory problems after your birthday celebration. June, you were treated for cardiac irregularities after a family barbecue." I remembered each of those incidents vividly. Each time, I had felt mysteriously ill after family gatherings, but the symptoms had been subtle enough that neither I nor the emergency room doctors had suspected deliberate poisoning. My family had been using me as a test subject, gradually increasing dosages to see how my body would react. "Dr. Carter, this means they've been trying to kill me for over a year." "I believe they were perfecting their method," she replied. "Building up tolerance levels, testing different medications, timing the effects. The chocolate delivery was meant to be their final, successful attempt." Detective Morrison arrived at the hospital within an hour of my call. He brought with him Agent Maria Santos from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and Agent Kevin Blake from the Federal Task Force on Organized Fraud. "Jerry, your case has attracted federal attention because of the interstate nature of your family's activities," Agent Santos explained. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone accustomed to investigating complex financial crimes. Agent Blake opened a thick file folder containing documents, photographs, and bank records. We've been building a case against your family for 8 months, following a trail of suspicious deaths and inheritance transfers across Colorado, Arizona, and Nevada. The agents spread out evidence that painted a picture of systematic murder spanning multiple years and states. In Arizona, Tom's elderly aunt had died suddenly after changing her will to leave everything to the family. In Nevada, Linda's uncle had succumbed to mysterious health problems just weeks after updating his estate planning documents. In each case, Agent Santos explained, the victims experienced gradual health decline over several months, followed by sudden death right before major financial transactions. The pattern is consistent with slow poisoning followed by a fatal dose. How many people do you think they've killed? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. We suspect at least 6 deaths over the past 5 years. Agent Blake replied, your grandfather Walter appears to have been their most recent victim before they turned their attention to you. The agent showed me financial records documenting massive transfers of money, property, and business assets following each suspicious death. My family had accumulated over $3 million in assets through their murder scheme, all while maintaining the appearance of grieving relatives who were simply trying to honor their loved ones' final wishes. Jerry, we believe your family chose you as their next target because you represented the largest potential payout, Agent Santos continued. Your grandfather's construction company alone is worth over $4 million, and there are additional assets including real estate, investments, and life insurance policies. But why go through all the elaborate planning with the chocolates? If they wanted me dead, why not just use the same gradual poisoning method they used on Walter? Agent Blake pulled out a timeline showing my family's activities over the past year. They needed you to die in a way that appeared sudden and accidental, with no connection to them. The sedative overdose would have looked like you accidentally took too many sleeping pills, possibly due to stress over the inheritance responsibilities. They were also under time pressure, Agent Santos added. There's a legal deadline approaching for the inheritance transfer. If you don't take formal control of the construction company by next month, the ownership automatically reverts to a family trust controlled by Tom and Linda. Dr. Carter rejoined our conversation with additional medical evidence. I've been in contact with Walter's physician, Dr. Robert Chen, who treated him during his final months. Dr. Chen documented several concerning symptoms that he couldn't explain at the time, but now appear consistent with gradual medication poisoning. The evidence was overwhelming and horrifying. My family had murdered my grandfather, the man who had raised me after my parents were too busy with their own lives to provide proper care. They had poisoned him slowly over months, watching him suffer and decline, all while pretending to be concerned relatives helping him through his final illness. There's one more thing you need to know, Detective Morrison said grimly. We have reason to believe your family is planning to accelerate their timeline. They know you're asking questions and gathering evidence. We've intercepted communications, suggesting they're planning to stage your suicide within the next 48 hours. My phone rang at that moment, and Sarah's name appeared on the screen. Agent Santos motioned for me to answer while she activated recording equipment. Jerry, where are you? Sarah's voice was strained and urgent. We need to talk immediately. David's condition has taken a turn for the worse, and the doctors are saying he might not make it. You need to come to the hospital right away. I looked at Dr. Carter, who shook her head and mouthed David is stable while holding up his current medical chart. I'm on my way, I told Sarah, playing along with whatever deception they were planning. After I hung up, Agent Santos explained their strategy. We're going to use this opportunity to gather recorded evidence of their confession. You'll wear a wire when you meet with them, and we'll have agents positioned nearby for your protection. What if they become violent when they realize I know the truth? That's a risk, Agent Blake admitted. But we need their confession to build a case that will hold up in federal court. Right now, we have circumstantial evidence and medical speculation. We need them to admit their crimes on record. As I prepared to face my family one more time, I realized that I was not just fighting for my own life anymore. I was fighting for justice for Walter, for the other victims they had killed, and for David and the twins who had nearly died because of my family's greed. The recording equipment felt strange against my chest, but I was determined to get the evidence needed to stop them permanently. My family had underestimated my strength and my determination to survive their murder plot. They were about to discover that their intended victim had become their worst nightmare. I arrived at my parents' house that evening to find the entire family gathered in the living room, their faces a mixture of fake grief and barely concealed panic. Sarah stood up the moment I entered, her eyes red from what appeared to be genuine tears. "Jerry, I have terrible news," she said, her voice breaking. "David died an hour ago. The doctors said the medication poisoning caused irreversible brain damage, and they couldn't save him." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I knew from Dr. Carter that David was stable and recovering. But the conviction in Sarah's voice and the grief on her face was so convincing that for a moment, I questioned my own reality. "What do you mean he died?" "I just spoke to his doctor this morning." Linda stepped forward, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "The hospital called us as his emergency contacts. Jerry," they said, "David suffered massive brain swelling caused by the sedative overdose. He never regained consciousness." Tom placed his hand on my shoulder with what felt like genuine sympathy. "Son, we know this wasn't intentional. You didn't know those chocolates were dangerous. But the police are going to want answers, and we need to prepare for what's coming." Mark, the lawyer, emerged from the kitchen carrying a briefcase and wearing his most serious expression. "Jerry, I've been in contact with the district attorney's office. They're planning to file charges for involuntary manslaughter and child endangerment. The evidence is pretty overwhelming that you gave dangerous substances to minors, but I didn't know the chocolates were drugged." I protested, feeling trapped despite knowing this was all an elaborate lie. "That's exactly what we're going to argue," Mark replied smoothly. "But we need your cooperation to build the best possible defense. I've drafted a statement acknowledging your responsibility while emphasizing your lack of intent to harm anyone." Sarah handed me a manila folder containing legal documents that painted me as a troubled individual who had accidentally poisoned children due to my own mental instability and poor judgment. According to these papers, I had a documented history of substance abuse, financial irresponsibility, and erratic behavior that made the tragedy predictable and preventable. "This is all fake," I said, scanning the fabricated evidence. "These drug tests, these psychological evaluations, these witness statements, none of this is real." "Jerry, you're in shock," Aunt Margaret said gently. "This is a lot to process, and grief can make us say things we don't mean. The important thing now is protecting you from criminal charges." Uncle Robert stepped forward with financial documents. "We've also taken the liberty of arranging some asset protection strategies. If you're convicted, the state could seize your inheritance to pay for civil damages. By transferring ownership to a family trust now, we can preserve Walter's legacy." I realized they were using David's fake death as leverage to force me into signing away my inheritance, while simultaneously setting me up to take responsibility for the attempted murders they had committed. The elaborate nature of their deception was both impressive and terrifying. "I want to see David's body," I said firmly. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Linda and Sarah exchanged quick glances before Sarah responded. "The hospital has already transferred him to the funeral home. The medical examiner needed to perform an autopsy because of the suspicious circumstances surrounding his death." "Which funeral home?" "Peterson and Sons on Grant Street," Tom answered without hesitation. "But Jerry, I don't think you should see him right now. The autopsy process. It wouldn't be good for your emotional state." Mark opened his briefcase and spread more legal documents across the coffee table. "Jerry, time is a critical factor here. The police are planning to arrest you tomorrow morning. If we can get your signature on these documents tonight, I can argue for reduced charges based on your cooperation and acceptance of responsibility." The documents included a full confession to accidentally poisoning 3 family members, a statement acknowledging my mental instability, a waiver of my inheritance rights, and a power of attorney giving the family control over my financial affairs. In essence, they wanted me to sign away my life, my freedom, and my future in one comprehensive package. What if I refused to sign these papers? Sarah's demeanor shifted subtly, and I caught a glimpse of coldness behind her tears. "Jerry, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to tell the police about your history of threatening family members. There are witnesses who can testify about your violent outbursts and paranoid accusations against us. What witnesses? What violent outbursts? Linda produced a stack of photographs showing me at various family gatherings over the past year. In each photo, I appeared argumentative, intoxicated, or emotionally unstable. I realized they had been carefully staging and documenting these moments, creating visual evidence to support their claims about my mental state. These photos show a pattern of concerning behavior, Mark explained. Combined with the medical evidence of substance abuse and the tragic outcome with the children, they paint a picture of someone who was clearly struggling with serious psychological issues. Tom sat down across from me with the tired expression of a disappointed father. Jerry, we're trying to help you here. If you fight these charges, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. If you cooperate and accept responsibility, we can probably get you sentenced to a psychiatric facility where you can get the help you need. I looked around the room at these people who had raised me, supported me, and shared decades of family memories with me. Now they were calmly discussing how to frame me for murders they had committed while stealing everything my grandfather had worked to build. I need time to think about this, I said, standing up to leave. Jerry, we don't have time, Sarah said urgently. The police are coming in the morning. Once you're arrested, our ability to help you becomes very limited. As I reached for the door, Mark's voice stopped me with a final threat disguised as legal advice. Jerry, I should mention that the district attorney is also considering charges against you for elder abuse in connection with Walter's death. Apparently, there's evidence suggesting you may have been stealing from him and manipulating his medications in the months before he died. If you don't cooperate with us now, those charges could result in a life sentence. I walked out of my parents' house feeling more alone and terrified than I had ever felt in my life. They had created an elaborate web of false evidence, fake witnesses, and manufactured documentation that would be almost impossible for me to disprove. Even worse, they had staged David's death so convincingly that I was beginning to question my own sanity. But as I sat in my car outside their house, I remembered the recording device hidden under my shirt. Every word of their confession and threats had been captured on tape. Agent Santos and Detective Morrison were listening to everything, gathering the evidence needed to expose their crimes. My family had underestimated my determination and my resources. They thought they were manipulating a helpless victim, but they were actually confessing their crimes to federal investigators. Their elaborate deception was about to become the evidence that would destroy them. The next morning, I met Agent Santos and Detective Morrison at a coffee shop downtown, feeling emotionally drained but determined to see this through to the end. They had spent the night analyzing the recordings from my family meeting, and their expressions told me they had discovered something significant. Jerry, your family's performance last night was even more incriminating than we hoped, Agent Santos said as she set up a small recording device on our secluded table. But what we discovered afterward is going to shock you. Detective Morrison opened a thick folder containing surveillance photographs, financial records, and legal documents. After you left your parents' house, we continued monitoring their communications. What we heard changes everything about this case. What do you mean? Agent Santos pressed play on the recording device, and I heard Tom's voice clearly through the speaker. He bought the whole story about David being dead. Frank, you did a great job coaching Sarah on how to cry convincingly. My heart nearly stopped as I heard my grandfather's voice respond. I've been watching Jerry's reactions carefully. He's stronger than we anticipated, but he's still not prepared for what's coming next. Grandpa Walter is alive, I whispered, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. Very much alive, Detective Morrison confirmed. Your grandfather staged his own death 18 months ago after discovering your family's murder plot against him. Has been working undercover with our investigation ever since. Agent Santos showed me photographs taken with telephoto lenses showing Walter moving around a safe house in the mountains outside Denver. He looked healthy, alert, and very much alive, wearing casual clothes and meeting with people I didn't recognize. Walter came to us 2 years ago with evidence that your family was slowly poisoning him, Agent Santos explained. He had been documenting his symptoms, collecting blood samples, and gathering financial evidence of their fraud schemes across multiple states. But why fake his death? Why not just have them arrested? Detective Morrison pulled out a timeline showing the complexity of my family's criminal network. Your family's operation is much bigger than we initially realized, Jerry. They're connected to similar inheritance fraud rings in 6 different states, involving dozens of victims and millions of dollars in stolen assets. Walter's fake death served multiple purposes. Agent Santos continued. It stopped them from killing him. It gave us time to build a comprehensive federal case, and it allowed Walter to work as an undercover operative to gather evidence of their other crimes. Agent Santos showed me recorded conversations, photographed documents, and financial records that Walter had collected over the past 18 months. The evidence revealed a sophisticated criminal enterprise that included forged wills, manipulated medical records, bribed officials, and coordinated murder plots spanning multiple years. David and the twins are also safe, aren't they? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. They're perfectly fine, Detective Morrison confirmed. They're staying at a secure facility run by Child Protective Services while we complete the investigation. David has been helping us document the family's threats and manipulation tactics he experienced over the years. Agent Santos played another recording, this time of David's voice, explaining how the family had forced him to participate in their schemes by threatening to hurt Jake and Mason if he didn't cooperate. His testimony revealed years of psychological abuse, financial manipulation, and carefully planned criminal activity. David never ate any drugged chocolates, Agent Santos explained. The family gave him and the boys harmless candy that looked similar, then coached them to pretend they were unconscious when paramedics arrived. They were taken to the hospital as part of the deception, but they were never actually in danger. I felt a mixture of relief and rage as the full scope of their manipulation became clear. They had used my love for David and the children to control my reactions and force me into making desperate decisions. There's more, Detective Morrison said grimly. We've also been investigating your ex-fiancée Amanda's involvement in their scheme. He showed me bank records documenting payments from Sarah to Amanda totaling over $15,000, spread across multiple transactions over the past 2 years. There were also photographs of Amanda meeting with family members and recordings of phone conversations where she reported on my activities and emotional state. Amanda was essentially a spy gathering intelligence about your vulnerabilities and relationships, Agent Santos explained. The family used that information to isolate you from potential support systems and manipulate your psychological state. But then Detective Morrison surprised me with additional evidence. However, Amanda came to us 6 months ago with concerns about what the family was asking her to do. She's been wearing a wire and gathering evidence for our investigation since then. I stared at the documents in disbelief. Amanda has been working with you. She realized she was participating in something dangerous when Sarah asked her to plant listening devices in your apartment and steal copies of your personal documents. Agent Santos explained. Amanda may have initially been motivated by money, but she drew the line at activities that could result in serious harm to you. Agent Santos showed me recent recordings where Amanda had refused to participate in the family's escalating schemes and had even warned them that their plans were becoming too dangerous and likely to attract law enforcement attention. Amanda has provided crucial evidence about the family's long-term planning and their connections to similar crimes in other states. Detective Morrison added, her cooperation has been essential to building our federal case. As we sat in that coffee shop reviewing months of evidence, I realized that Walter, Detective Morrison, Agent Santos, Amanda, and even Dr. Carter had been working together to protect me and build a case against my family's criminal enterprise. While I had felt isolated and manipulated, I had actually been surrounded by allies who were carefully gathering the evidence needed to ensure justice. What happens next? I asked. Agent Santos smiled for the first time since I had met her. Next, we spring the trap your family has been walking into for 18 months. Tomorrow night, they're planning to stage your suicide and finalize their theft of the inheritance. Instead, they're going to find themselves facing federal agents with enough evidence to put them in prison for the rest of their lives. Walter emerged from a back room of the coffee shop, looking exactly like the grandfather I remembered, but with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully completed a complex and dangerous mission. Hello, Jerry, he said simply. I'm sorry we had to put you through all of this, but it was the only way to gather enough evidence to stop them permanently. I stood up and hugged my grandfather, feeling the relief of knowing that the most important person in my life was safe and that I was no longer facing this nightmare alone. Walter was alive, David and the children were safe, and we had the evidence needed to bring my family's criminal empire crashing down around them. Grandpa, I thought I had lost everyone I cared about. You never lost me, Jerry. I've been protecting you every step of the way, even when you didn't know it. Tomorrow night, we're going to finish this once and for all. Agent Santos and Detective Morrison spent the next day briefing me on the elaborate sting operation they had planned for that evening. My family expected me to arrive at Tom and Linda's house at 8 o'clock to sign the confession papers and financial documents. Instead, they were going to get the shock of their lives. The key is maintaining the illusion that you're defeated and ready to cooperate, Agent Santos explained as technicians fitted me with multiple recording devices. We need them to feel comfortable enough to discuss their plans openly and admit their previous crimes. Walter sat across from me in the Federal Task Force's Mobile Command Center, looking like a master strategist preparing for the final battle of a long campaign. Jerry, these people have underestimated you your entire life. Tonight, they're going to discover exactly how wrong they've been. At 7:55, I knocked on my parents' front door, carrying the legal documents they expected me to sign and wearing the expression of someone who had been completely broken by recent events. Sarah answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and a sympathetic smile that I now recognized as completely false. Jerry, I'm so glad you decided to cooperate, she said, leading me into the living room, where the entire family was assembled exactly as they had been the night before. Tom stood up and embraced me with what felt like genuine paternal warmth. Son, I know this is difficult, but you're making the right choice for everyone involved. Mark, the lawyer, had prepared an elaborate signing ceremony, complete with notarized documents and multiple witnesses. As I sat down at the coffee table surrounded by my family, I realized they were all performing their roles in what they believed was the final act of their long con. Before we begin, I said, looking around the room at each of them, I want to understand exactly what happened to David and the children. I need to know the truth so I can live with my conscience. Linda and Sarah exchanged glances before Linda responded with practiced grief. Jerry, David suffered massive brain damage from the medication overdose. The doctors said he felt no pain, and he passed peacefully surrounded by people who loved him. And Jake and Mason, they're recovering slowly. Sarah replied, the doctors expect them to make full recoveries, but they'll need therapy to deal with the trauma of what happened. I nodded sadly and picked up the first document. I just want to make sure I understand what I'm signing. This confession states that I deliberately gave dangerous chocolates to children knowing they contained sedatives. Mark leaned forward eagerly. The language acknowledges your responsibility, while emphasizing your lack of criminal intent. It's the best deal we're going to get from the prosecutor, and this financial document transfers all of my inheritance rights to a family trust. It protects the assets from civil lawsuits and criminal forfeiture, Uncle Robert explained. If you're convicted, the state could seize everything Walter worked to build. This way, his legacy stays in the family. I pretended to read through the documents carefully, while the hidden recording devices captured every word of their explanations and justifications. They were so confident in their manipulation that they spoke openly about their plans and previous crimes. You know, Tom said conversationally, your grandfather would be proud of how you're handling this situation. Walter always said family comes first, and you're proving that by protecting everyone else. That was my cue. I looked up from the documents with confusion. It's funny, you should mention Grandpa Walter. I was just thinking about him. The room went completely silent. I could see the color draining from Linda's face as she realized what I might be implying. Jerry, Sarah said carefully, why are you thinking about Grandpa Walter? Because he's standing right behind you. Walter stepped through the front door that Agent Santos had quietly unlocked, looking exactly like the man they thought they had murdered 18 months earlier. The expressions on my family's faces shifted through disbelief, terror, and panic as they realized their elaborate scheme was collapsing around them. Hello, Tom, Linda, Sarah, Walter said calmly. I think we need to have a conversation about some chocolates. Linda actually screamed and fell backward over her chair. Tom's face went white as he stared at his father-in-law who was supposed to be dead and buried. Sarah tried to run for the back door, but Agent Santos and Detective Morrison entered from the kitchen, blocking her escape. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Agent Santos announced. displaying her badge. "Nobody move. You're all under arrest." Mark tried to grab his briefcase and destroy evidence, but Agent Blake appeared from the basement stairs and wrestled the case away from him. Uncle Robert attempted to flush something down the bathroom toilet, but local police officers had already secured all the exits. "This is impossible," Tom said, staring at Walter in shock. "You died. We saw your body. We went to your funeral." Walter smiled grimly. "You saw the body of a homeless man who died of natural causes and bore a passing resemblance to me. These are recorded conversations planning Jerry's death." He played a recording of Tom's voice discussing optimal sedative dosages for someone of my weight and body type. Then Linda's voice calculating how long my body would need to be undiscovered for their alibi to work. Then Sarah's voice discussing how to manipulate the inheritance transfer documents. "And this," Walter said, producing the box of original chocolates from evidence storage, "contains enough sedatives to kill 3 adult men. The dosage calculations in your handwriting, Tom, are particularly incriminating." Tom finally broke down as the weight of evidence overwhelmed him. "Dad, you have to understand. We needed that money. The business was failing. We had debts. The kids needed college funds. Jerry would have wasted everything on his stupid projects. So you decided to murder your own son. We thought it would look like an accident." Tom protested desperately. Nobody was supposed to get hurt except Jerry, and he would have just gone to sleep and not woken up. Linda started crying hysterically. "We never meant for David and the children to eat those chocolates. That was Jerry's fault for giving them away. David and the children were never in danger," Walter revealed. "They ate harmless candy and pretended to be unconscious as part of our investigation. They're perfectly safe." Sarah's last desperate attempt at manipulation was to appeal to my emotions. "Jerry, you can't let them arrest your own family. We're blood relatives. Family protects family." I looked at this woman who had helped plan my murder, who had manipulated me for years, who had tried to frame me for crimes she committed, and I felt nothing but pity for her complete lack of understanding. "Sarah, you stopped being my family the moment you tried to kill me for money. As federal agents led my family away in handcuffs, I realized that the nightmare was finally over. The people who had raised me were criminals who had never loved me, but I was surrounded by real family now. Walter, who had risked everything to protect me, Detective Morrison, and Agent Santos, who had worked tirelessly to ensure justice. Amanda, who had found the courage to do the right thing despite her mistakes, and David, who had endured years of abuse to help expose their crimes. The recording devices had captured everything we needed for federal prosecution. My family's criminal enterprise was finished, and I was finally free to build a life based on trust, honesty, and genuine relationships. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse in Denver, watching as Judge Patricia Williams delivered the final sentences in United States v. Morrison. The courtroom was packed with victims, investigators, and family members who had been affected by my family's criminal enterprise. Tom received 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and financial fraud across multiple states. The judge noted that his leadership role in the organization and his complete lack of remorse warranted the maximum sentence allowed under federal guidelines. Linda was sentenced to 20 years for accessory to attempted murder and conspiracy charges. Her tearful pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears after prosecutors played recordings of her discussing optimal poison dosages and cleanup procedures. Sarah received 18 years for identity theft, conspiracy, and child endangerment. The judge was particularly harsh in condemning her manipulation of her own children as props in the family's criminal schemes. Mark, the lawyer, lost his license permanently and received 15 years for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and abuse of his position as an officer of the court. The State Bar Association launched additional investigations into his other clients' cases. Uncle Robert and Cousin Patricia each received 10 years for their roles in the financial fraud and money laundering operations. The prosecution had evidence linking them to similar schemes dating back over a decade. But the most satisfying moment came when federal prosecutors revealed the full scope of restitution my family would be paying. Assets totaling over $8 million were recovered from hidden accounts, offshore investments, and property purchases made with stolen money. Every victim of their schemes would receive full compensation, with additional damages for pain and suffering. I stood up as Judge Williams addressed me directly. Mr. Morrison, the court recognizes your courage in exposing this criminal enterprise and your cooperation with federal investigators. Your actions have prevented additional murders and brought justice to victims across multiple states. After the sentencing hearing, I walked out of the courthouse with Walter, Detective Morrison, Agent Santos, and Frank Hutchinson. The Denver sunshine felt warm on my face as I realized I was truly free for the first time in years. Walter and I had spent the past 6 months rebuilding our relationship and restructuring the construction company. We discovered that the business was actually thriving, generating over $6 million annually in revenue from affordable housing projects and commercial developments. The financial problems Tom had claimed were entirely fabricated. "Jerry," Walter said as we stood on the courthouse steps, "I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become. You faced the worst kind of betrayal and came through it with your integrity intact." Detective Morrison shook my hand with genuine warmth. "Jerry, you helped us solve the biggest inheritance fraud case in Colorado history. Your family's conviction will send a message to other criminals that this kind of scheme won't be tolerated." Agent Santos handed me a card with contact information for victim advocacy resources. "Jerry, if you ever need anything, or if you're interested in helping other victims of family financial abuse, please don't hesitate to call." David met us outside the courthouse, looking healthy and confident after months of therapy and counseling. He had moved in with Walter and me, and we were slowly building the kind of honest, supportive relationship that brothers should have. "Jerry, I want to apologize again for all the years I went along with their manipulation," David said. "I was scared and confused, but that doesn't excuse my participation." "David, you were a victim just like I was. What matters is that we're building something better now." Jake and Mason had been placed with wonderful foster families who were helping them recover from the trauma of being used as pawns in their parents' criminal schemes. We maintained regular contact, and they were gradually learning to trust adults again. Amanda had contacted me several months earlier to apologize for her role in the family's manipulation. While we didn't restart our romantic relationship, we had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to healing from our experiences. "Jerry, I'll never forgive myself for taking money to spy on you," Amanda had told me during one of our conversations. "But working with the FBI to expose their crimes was the most important thing I've ever done." Dr. Carter had become not just a medical professional but a trusted advisor who helped me understand the psychological impact of years of manipulation and gaslighting. Through therapy, I learned to recognize healthy relationships and set appropriate boundaries with people in my life. The most meaningful change was what Walter and I did with the construction company. We established the Morrison Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention, using company profits to fund educational programs, support services, and legal assistance for elderly victims of family financial abuse. Every elderly person deserves to live with dignity and security. I told the local newspaper when they featured our foundation, nobody should have to fear that their own family members are planning to harm them for money. We also created educational materials for families about recognizing signs of financial elder abuse and resources for reporting suspicious activities. The Foundation's website received thousands of visits from people concerned about elderly relatives or seeking help for their own situations. Frank Hutchinson helped us establish legal protections to ensure that future inheritance disputes would be handled transparently and ethically. We created detailed documentation requirements and independent oversight procedures to prevent future manipulation. 1 year after that terrifying phone call about the chocolates, I celebrated my 34th birthday with Walter, David, Dr. Carter, Detective Morrison, Amanda, and several new friends I had met through the Foundation's work. We gathered at Walter's house for a barbecue, sharing stories and laughter in a way that felt genuinely warm and supportive. "Jerry," Walter said as we sat on his back porch watching the sunset over the Rocky Mountains, "I want you to understand something important. The money, the business, the assets, none of that matters compared to the kind of man you've become. Your real inheritance isn't financial. It's your character, your integrity, and your commitment to helping others." As I looked around at the people who had supported me through the worst period of my life, I realized that Walter was absolutely right. The family that had raised me had been defined by greed, manipulation, and willingness to hurt others for personal gain. But the family I had chosen was defined by honesty, loyalty, and commitment to justice. Grandpa, I've learned that family isn't about blood relations or shared genetics. Family is about people who genuinely care about your well-being and who you can trust to be there when life gets difficult. David nodded thoughtfully. Jerry, before all this happened, I thought family meant you had to accept whatever treatment people gave you because you were related to them. Now I understand that real family members don't threaten you, manipulate you, or try to harm you. Doctor, Carter raised her glass of lemonade in a toast. To the Morrison family, defined not by blood but by love, respect, and commitment to each other's happiness and safety. As we clinked glasses and watched the stars appear over Colorado, I reflected on the lessons I had learned through this nightmare. Trust must be earned through consistent actions, not assumed because of family relationships. Money and inheritance can bring out the worst in people, but they can also be used to help others and create positive change. Most importantly, surviving betrayal by people you love doesn't make you bitter or unable to trust again. It teaches you to recognize genuine care and appreciate the people who prove their trustworthiness through their choices. The construction company now employs 47 people and generates over $10 million annually in revenue. We focus on affordable housing projects that help working families achieve homeownership and commercial developments that create jobs in underserved communities. Every project we complete honors Walter's original vision of using business success to strengthen communities. The Morrison Foundation has helped over 200 elderly victims of family financial abuse and has worked with law enforcement agencies across 6 states to develop better investigation procedures for inheritance fraud cases. We've created educational materials that are now used by senior centers, legal aid organizations, and police departments nationwide. Most importantly, I've learned to build relationships based on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared values, rather than obligation or manipulation. The people in my life now are there because we genuinely care about each other's well-being, not because we share DNA or have financial connections. As I finish this story, I want to leave you with the most important lesson I learned. Your worth as a person is not determined by what others do to you, but by how you choose to respond to those challenges. When people try to manipulate, control, or harm you, you have the power to refuse their definitions of who you are and what you deserve. If you're dealing with toxic family members, manipulative relationships, or people who try to control you through guilt and obligation, please know that you deserve better. Real love doesn't involve threats, manipulation, or attempts to control your life choices. You have the right to set boundaries, demand respect, and choose relationships that support your growth and happiness. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't immediately prove what's happening. Document concerning behaviors, reach out to professionals for help, and remember that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Family should be your source of strength, support, and unconditional love. If the people in your life aren't providing those things, you have the right and the responsibility to find people who will. Before I sign off, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever experienced manipulation or betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you rebuild your ability to trust others while still protecting yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your experiences might help someone else who's struggling with similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding your strength, and share this with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in facing toxic family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that no matter how dark things get, you have the power to fight back, seek justice, and build a better life surrounded by people who truly care about you. Trust yourself, protect your well-being, and never give up hope that better days are ahead.